Hello and welcome to this special 100th episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. We made it, boys. 100.
We did it. We're in treble digits. What happens now? Where's my reward?
I don't know. We've been doing this for a while, yeah, and we've managed to squeeze out 100 of these. So hopefully someone out there likes it.
Yep. Thank you to the small but dedicated number of people who have been with us the whole time. We love you guys. Please stay with us.
It's a special moment. Yeah, we've managed to get to 100. Yeah, which I know, it's an impressive accomplishment. Lots of podcasts don't make it this far.
Yeah, many a show either flames out in the first couple of episodes or flames out after about 6 months when they realise the sheer ongoing grind of it all. But no, we're still here, nearly 4 years and 100 episodes later, pushing out the episodes, covering the pop culture.
Yep.
Pleased to report that Marvel is still the dominant force.
Yep. Although we're not discussing Marvel, ironically, for the 100th episode, even though it is the thing we've discussed the most.
After a year in which we really have rinsed the Marvel Cinematic Universe to a point that even I am starting to feel we should talk about something else, we have actually got a Marvel 300th episode, which is possibly not representative, but nice change, to be honest.
Anyway, so we're not looking at Marvel, but for this special 100th episode, we are resurrecting our old recommendation segment that long-time listeners of the podcast will remember from the early days. So, in this special episode, we'll be discussing Nick's recommendation of Transmetropolitan and my recommendation of A Room for Romeo Brass. We'll also be reviewing the new Breaking Bad film, El Camino. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Well, I've spent the last couple of weeks watching a new HBO show. I think I'm sure I've been saying more this year than I have in previous years. HBO seems to be having a reasonably decent year. Anyway, yeah, I've spent this week or this fortnight watching Euphoria, the teen drama on HBO starring Zendaya, in which we discover that the teens are very much not all right and are reacting to the sadness and disengagement of the wider world by trading a lot of nudes and doing a lot of drugs, it seems. It feels to me very much like what would happen if 2019 premium telly in America tried to remake Skins. But it has that sort of slightly semi-titillating, here's some hedonism, we both like it and don't like it. We very much want the glamour and excitement of it, but also it's actually kind of has a downside, doesn't it? And because it's American serious premium telly, it maybe hits the downside a bit harder. Euphoria is, despite the happy name, kind of depressing. But it's mostly depressing in a sort of watchable, entertaining way. It's a very more about building its mood, I think, than telling a story. It doesn't really have the strongest of guiding plots. It's just about these characters staggering through this sad landscape. But the actors are very good. It is very watchable. I did occasionally find myself wondering if it would have made a better movie than a TV show. And annoyingly, it does kind of end the season by throwing to a second season, which, considering I thought it might have made a good movie, I'm almost on some level disappointed that they're even making. But despite that, it is a decent bit of TV drama, and although I think it's been removed from the Now TV streaming service I watched it on pretty shortly, it's probably worth a look if you liked Skins or sort of premium drama about teens struggling with drug addiction. And Zendaya, who is really, really good in this. Yeah,
I've also been watching this show. I've seen 6 out of the 8 episodes, I think, so I've not quite finished it yet. But I have also been enjoying it. Yeah, I can recommend this show. Yeah, I think the Skins comparison is an apt one. Like, it's like a HBO high budget version of Skins. I think also similar to Skins, because when Skins first came out in the UK, I was about the same age as the sort of protagonists of Skins. And I do think that, like, Skins, although was kind of interesting, it's probably not representative of the majority of British teenagers' experience. And I don't think Euphoria is representative of what all American teens are up to. I can imagine probably most teenage life in America in the 21st century is a lot more dull than Euphoria makes it look, with all the crazy parties and drugs and sex. But it does tell a very interesting, good story. It's got quite a wide range of diverse characters. Like there's trans characters, there's characters sort of dealing with their sexuality, there's characters from different like ethnic backgrounds. So it's got quite a broad tapestry of characters to draw on, and they're all kind of interesting, and they each have their own kind of story. Usually, which is like each episode sort of usually begins with a backstory of one character delivered by Zendaya's narration, which is kind of brings everyone to life.
And every so often, there's a sort of really in-your-face, sort of quirky, auteur-driven section. Like, I don't think you've reached that bit yet, actually, so I probably shouldn't describe it. There's a bit where the Zendaya character Rue gives a lecture about dick pics. Yeah, sort of horrifying dick pics versus terrifying dick pics. The important distinction between them. And it's full of a lot of that sort of thing, which is a sort of a combination of enjoyably quirky and still a little bit we so edgy. But, obviously we've talked in the past extensively about how annoying we so edgy media can be. I think the aggressively teen vibe here is what lets you kind of get away with a little bit of the we so edgy.
Yeah, no one likes to be edgy like teens. It's got a really cool, distinctive visual style. There's all sorts of bits when kind of train spotting-esque when the rude character's taking drugs and is literally walking on the wall or something like that. Yeah, there's a real visual flair to the show. It's produced and sort of show ran by Sam Levinson, who directed Assassination Nation, which is a teen drama film, which I saw at the London Film Festival.
Oh yeah, no wonder you liked this.
Yeah, last year. In the 2018 London Film Festival. It's probably the best thing I saw at the film festival that year. I think the Assassination Nation turns the kind of hyper-reality up a notch, above what Euphoria does. It ends in with a massive shootout. They're going for a sort of different style because Euphoria is more supposed to be like a drama, whereas Assassination Nation becomes a sort of bizarre action movie. But they both have this really distinctive kind of hyper-real visual style that I think works really well for the sort of the Instagram age. And Sam Levinson he's got a good eye, which you can see in Euphoria.
Oh yeah, it's very visually artful. I think a criticism I've seen, because once I finished it I did go and read some reviews, is that Euphoria is, in its way, a little bit style over substance, which I think some of it possibly kind of is. There's some bits where wow, that's a beautiful sequence. Couldn't tell you what the fucking point was, but beautiful sequence, fair enough. Which I think, again, the sort of slightly try-hard teen vibe lets you get away with a little bit, but it is in there somewhere.
Yeah, the plot is quite slow and unfolds quite slowly, and there's quite a broad range of characters, but you're not really here for the plot, you're more so here for the characters and the visuals. Although the plot's not disappointing, it's possibly just a bit slow.
Do you think there's anything to my opinion that it could have made a better movie, or would you rather have had the full TV version?
I can see the value of saying, again, there's not a huge amount of plot. So if you had the same amount of plot could probably fit into a film. But I do feel that they're kind of the character study is kind of the core of the show, and I don't think you could go into each character in quite as much detail in a film. Assassination Nation has basically the four main characters, and even amongst that, it focuses on one more than the other three. Whereas Euphoria has a kind of a sort of a central cast of about 8 characters when you include the sort of some of the parents and boyfriends and stuff of the main characters. So I think you to get that rich characterization, you need a slightly broader canvas.
Yeah, it's true. It does let them do a lot of sort of more meaningful side quests is what I was going to say. Yeah, why not? Into the other characters, whereas, if this was a movie, I imagined it would be even more specifically the Zendaya thing than it already is.
I mean, for example, the 5 minutes at the beginning of each episode that kind of fills in the backstory of every character up to that point is that's the sort of stuff that you can't really afford to do in a movie, apart from maybe just for your main character.
Yeah.
But no, it's good. I liked it.
Yeah, me too. I will, despite my occasional remarks about not being sure if it needs one, I'll probably be back for season 2. Anyway, Alastair, what have you been consuming in the last 2 weeks?
So I've been at the London Film Festival, which, London Film Festival 2019. Similar to Assassination Nation, each year it's a great opportunity to find some new, independent, unusual, non-English language films, all of the above, some combination of the above. Yeah, Assassination Nation was the sort of thing that, I don't know if it would have caught my eye if I hadn't been at the festival and deliberately looking for unusual films to see. But this year, I saw 7 films, a bit less than normal.
You're slowing down.
Yeah, there was the year when I saw 14 films at the festival, but that was probably too many. 14 films in 10 days is a lot. Yeah, but I got some good recommendations of stuff that's coming out soon. Some highlights from the festival was Greed, a new film from Michael Winterbottom starring Steve Coogan, David Mitchell, Tim Key and Pearl Mackie of Doctor Who fame. Yeah, and it's a sort of satire mainly on Philip Green, the billionaire owner of high street chains who ran them into the ground and made loads of money whilst everyone else lost out. It's got a satire on his life and kind of the ultra-rich. Steve Coogan plays a sort of bully boy billionaire, and David Mitchell plays a journalist who's writing a book about him. Yeah, it's sort of funny and dark and sort of quite grim in sort of the world's kind of really fucked sort of way. But Steve Coogan obviously does great satire, and he's worked with Michael Winterbottom before on films like 24-Hour Party People and A Cock and Bull Story. So yeah, it's a good team they've got there. Loose is a good film that's Luce, Luce, starring Naomi Watts, Tim Roth and Octavia Spencer. That's actually probably quite a good companion piece to Euphoria because it's another teen drama set in a high school, or like, yeah, around high school. Whereas, yeah, different sort of vibe, but yeah, maybe another side of teen life in America. That one goes more into racial politics, which is something that Euphoria doesn't go into very much. So if you're looking for more interesting teen dramas after Euphoria, I can recommend Loose. I saw a film called The King, which is just coming out on Netflix soon. That's a sort of loose adaptation of the Shakespeare Henry IV plays. It's got really good battle in it. Lots of medieval swords and fighting. So very realistic. Medieval fighting. When they heard an interview of the director, and he said, a lot of the time in medieval battles, it would just end up with people scrabbling around in the mud, sort of rolling on each other and just trying to hit each other with bits of metal. It's not as glamorous as you might think. So yeah, so if you're down for some bloody real medieval battles, I can recommend The King. Actually, it's good. Yeah, if you want some sort of Game of Thrones without the magic, I can recommend that. Lots of court politics, intrigue. That's a good one. I'm not going to go through all 7 films in level detail, but those are the ones that jump out recommendations, I could say. But there's also lots of other good stuff. Saw a Syrian film called The Cave, a German film called Relativity that played around with time. That was quite interesting.
Yeah, I came along to that one. It was pretty good. Would have liked a more unpredictable ending, but the sort of out of sequence stuff and the character stuff was good.
Yeah, that was a good film. That was a debut film from the director whose name temporarily escapes me, but I think she's a talent to watch. Yeah, sort of person who'll end up directing Marvel films in a few years. Yeah, I saw a film called Western Stars about Bruce Springsteen. That was very Bruce Springsteen. It begins with like a shot of like an American plane with wild horses running across it. Then a battered old car drives up, and then Bruce Springsteen gets out wearing a cowboy hat and just goes like, "Freedom and belonging, the two cores at the heart of America." Like, yeah, my Springsteen accent's terrible, but yeah, I was basically like, wow, this is all Bruce all the time. But if you like Bruce Springsteen, I can recommend that film. So yeah, good spatteral films this year at the film festival. I like to focus my recommendations on some of the higher profile films. I could recommend The Cave, which is a Syrian film, but getting hold of it is going to be almost impossible. Sorry guys. But yeah, there was once on the recommendation section, I recommended a film which I think has only ever been screened once, and I was at that screening, so I don't know how anyone's supposed to track it down.
That's quite the brag.
Yeah, but that's unhelpful to recommend.
We try to be an inclusive podcast, lad, so every so often, Alastair has to remind you that he's done something you will never do.
Yeah. What's the point in having a podcast if you can't occasionally use it to humble brag?
Episode 100, and we're finally going to shed those remaining listeners.
And The King will be on Netflix shortly, so it's suddenly accessible.
No, that's not the Scorsese, is it? The Scorsese is The Irishman.
Yeah, The Irishman was also at the festival. I've not seen it, but that's coming out in the cinema, I think, at the beginning of November, and then comes to Netflix 2 weeks later. In favour of The Irishman, like I'm interested in it. Got 5-star review from Peter Bradshaw in The Guardian, who's a film critic I do respect a lot. On the downside, it's 3.5 hours long.
I will not be seeing that with you.
Maybe one to wait until it's on Netflix, so you can pause and go to the toilet halfway through. So I can imagine we will be discussing it at some point on the podcast in some
the
form.
Recommendation section, so I don't have to watch it.
Yeah, most likely, yeah.
Okay, and first up in this 100th episode Bonanza Carnival event, we are going to review El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. A new movie that dropped on Netflix a couple of weeks ago, serving as a small epilogue, a wee dessert to the whole Breaking Bad saga, focusing on what happens to Aaron Paul's Jesse Pinkman character after he was seen driving happily away from the Nazis at the end of the actual Breaking Bad finale. So yeah, this is Walter White's junior partner who, in one of the big sort of narrative masterstrokes of Breaking Bad, started off as the sort of random drug dealer that Walter White recruited to help him cook drugs to save his family and become an arsehole, and ended up being kind of the moral centre of the show after he, a relatively relatable human being, realised that Walter White was not relatable or a human being. And then, of course, he was punished for this by being locked in a cage and forced to cook meth for said Nazis. And yet Walter White, in a bit of guilt, sprung him from the Nazis at the end of Breaking Bad, and this film is about what happens next, and features a assortment of Breaking Bad cameos, as well as some new characters along the way in Jesse's little journey. So, we've both seen it. Alastair, what did you think?
Yeah, it was very enjoyable and certainly very tense, which was, good. It was one of those things that, you're just kind of hooked from the beginning. What I liked kind of most about it is that the ending of Breaking Bad it's a bit sort of vague about what happens to Jesse after the events of the last episode. But the kind of premise of the ending is that Jesse is all right. That's the kind of resolution for his character. But this is the story of how he becomes all right. I don't know if that's an odd way to put it, but yeah, this kind of delivers on the promise of the ending of Breaking Bad because it doesn't go into a huge amount of detail about what happens to Jesse. So it's quite nice to see them, square off that piece of the plot. And it's quite tense throughout. There's a few good bits. I don't want to be too spoilery, but there's a really good scene when Jesse's trying to recover some money from one of the Nazi drug dealers that you mentioned in the opening from their flat, but at the same time there's various cops coming to look for evidence in the flat as well, and there's a sort of standoff that again goes in an unusual direction. I don't want to say too much in case people haven't seen it, but I felt that it was quite good at creating a tense scene like that, and then usually it would go in an unexpected direction. There was usually something a twist or something that would kind of surprise you, and the fact that they could kind of keep surprising you I thought was quite good.
Yeah, I think it had a sort of moment-to-moment action movie vibe that both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul have kind of got away from a bit. I mean, there's still a bit of stuff there to remind you of those shows, because obviously there's a sequence where Jesse tears a flat apart and you get a sort of view from above, map style view to show you exactly what he's doing, which is very sort of, here's the process, everybody, which is something we've talked about before in Better Call Saul. But yeah, the sort of tense action movie showdown with the cops, and there's another couple of showdowns as well towards the end, which are perhaps a little bit more on-the-nose action film than Breaking Bad would normally go to, and it does at least give this a little bit of its own flavour. I'm not saying I want it to be a pilot for a series. I would very much like to, with all love to Aaron Paul, never see Jesse Pinkman again, but I do think there was a nice effort to make this something slightly different to justify the fact that they've waited 5-6 years before making this epilogue that they should probably have made much closer to when Breaking Bad actually finished.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of sceptical when it was announced, but then I reminded myself I was kind of sceptical whether Better Call Saul would work as a show, and it totally does. So I was basically well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, because I was wrong before to be concerned about Better Call Saul. And, again, I think this was a good sort of epilogue to make. But I don't want to see this to be the beginning of another series, because like I say, the premise of the whole thing is kind of Jesse is okay at the end of Breaking Bad, and this is how he becomes okay. So I think very much his story is resolved at the end of this, by delivering on what was implied by the ending of the TV show. But this is definitely the end.
Yeah, I think I would have been sceptical of a lot of forms of Breaking Bad continuation, even with Better Call Saul, because I do very much subscribe to a certain degree of let it rest. Don't prise open the coffin and jig the corpse around. Let things end. But no, Jesse, when I watched Breaking Bad ending, I very much came away thinking, okay, that was mostly very good, but I felt Jesse got slightly cheated of a full, meaningful, emotional ending. And I guess validation, as Vince Gilligan, the showrunner of Breaking Bad and the writer and director of this movie, seems to pretty much agree with me, as he's basically come back and made a movie to supply that missing Jesse Pinkman ending. Yeah. So this is the epilogue that I was willing to let them do, because it's basically the one I wanted. And if anything, I still think the best form of it would have been a single episode, like a normal episode length, rather than a 2-hour movie, which aired straight after or not long after Breaking Bad, rather than this 5 years later. But on the other hand, I'll take it. I like the fact they exercise good restraint in which characters they bring back for cameos. They could have shoehorned in the whole White family, or at least the ones who aren't dead at the end of Breaking Bad, and happily they don't.
Yeah, and they don't bring in Saul or things like that,
Yeah, they mostly focus, with the exception of the one that they kind of had to do, and you probably know who I mean, but I'm going to not spoil it, just in case. They don't really bring in anyone who doesn't have an obvious direct connection to Jesse and reason to be there, which is probably for the best. And I think it's important. An important part of this was establishing that Jesse is kind of breaking free of that whole Breaking Bad Walter White orbit, and they did more or less manage to do that. So it was a nice cap. It did not change my life, and I kind of wish it had come out closer to Breaking Bad, so I maybe felt the emotions a bit more, but it did provide the remaining smear of closure I was kind of missing.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I thought Aaron Paul plays the character really well, and he was excellent in this film. Jesse was my favourite character, I think, in the original show, partly because he had a more complex arc. I think, as we said in the Joker review last time, that the Walter White arc is, for Breaking Bad, is the kind of straightforward decline plot, whereas the Jesse character is more interesting. He has kind of rises and falls throughout the whole series. So and also I thought Aaron Paul played him really well. There was some interesting developments in his character. His story in the original show doesn't go in the direction you think it will, and it was good to see him play the character again, especially in the early scenes just after he's escaped from being in a cage for a year or something. He looks just tortured, and not only just obviously there's lots of makeup, they've added lots of scars and things, but just the way he he performs the character, you really get the sense of like, you know, someone who's been like treated horrendously and, you know, he's suffering from PTSD, and yeah, he's really convincing in the role. So yeah, I'm glad Aaron Paul got to show you really can act, you know, once more.
I keep waiting for him to have his next big role. I mean, I guess, you know, you have your handful of big iconic roles, and, you know, not everyone gets to go straight from one to the other. He had Jesse Pinkman, and I'm sure he'll have another one eventually. I have not seen him in as many things post Breaking Bad as I kind of expected to.
Yeah, Bryan Cranston has been in quite a few things. He's attempted to get away from the Walter White character by playing like lots of different characters, but like, he was in like Argo, for example, that was very successful. He had a biopic of a famous writer, and I can't remember who that was either, but he's had a few high-profile films, although nothing as like successful as Breaking Bad.
I think Aaron Paul has a major role in the third season of my beloved Westworld, so I'll be excited to watch that when it finally airs.
Next up, we were discussing my recommendation to Nick, which was Shane Meadows' first feature film, A Room for Romeo Brass. The film was made in 1999 and is the feature debut for Meadows, his frequent writing partner Paul Fraser, and his frequent star Paddy Considine. Long-term fans of the podcast will remember that we previously covered a subsequent Paddy Considine, Shane Meadows, Paul Fraser collaboration in Dead Man's Shoes. Well, this is the film that the whole partnership began with. It was one of the first films that opened my mind to British independent cinema when I saw it when I was a teenager. The plot roughly follows two teenage boys, Gavin and Romeo, whose normal working-class Midlands life is turned upside down when they befriend Morel, played by Paddy Considine, who seems harmless at first, but then after they play a practical joke on him, turns quite dangerous. Yep, so we've watched this film recently. Nick's just seen it for the first time, so what did you think?
It's a bit weird to watch a film where a child is stalked by a man who appears to be a psychotic Alan Partridge.
That's a good summary of it.
The Morel character by Paddy Considine, who's very much like the highlight of this film. Yeah, he's got this sort of weird, avuncular yet unsettling charisma. There's something very specifically British about him. I've met a lot of people like that in town centres.
Yeah,
he's very good at this. I quite enjoyed it. There's a nice sort of rising sort of tension through it. I think it hit me slightly in what I'm going to call, and may have called before, the comedy-drama gap, in which I found myself wanting to be either laughing more or gripped with tension more at some point. Like, I didn't really feel it built to a truly horrific climax, although it was pretty good. But yeah, I can see how they've both Shane Meadows and Paddy Considine have gone on to have a career out of this, as it definitely shows they've both got something going on and interesting things to say. But no, it was a nice length. After my snark about The Irishman earlier, you'll be surprised to hear that I liked this 86-minute film. And the bits where the Considine character gets to expose his darker side, played off against his sort of, this sort of rambling Alan Partridge charm he has when he's, not losing his shit. The contrast between those two were very good.
Yeah, I think it's an exceptional performance from Considine. As you say, it's kind of the core of this film. Like, I do think it's brilliant seeing the moment when he flips. He's basically sort of a nice, lovable guy, a bit odd. These kids play a practical joke on him, and then he's kind of fine with it for a bit. But then, like about 2 scenes later, he suddenly flips and turns, quite disturbingly intense. Yeah, he like pulls a knife on one of the kids and things like that. Yeah, Paddy Considine really does sell the kind of unhinged nature of the character. Yeah, but it's interesting you say. It is definitely like comedy drama. It's kind of in the middle. There's lots of like kind of funny bits, like when Romeo has to buy like chips for his family but eats most of them and then has to try and like move all the chips around to make sure it looks like he hasn't done that. It's all quite funny. But then then it's got moments of real tension. Yeah, like the Romeo's strange relationship with his dad. It's again, there's quite a lot of tension there. One of the things I quite liked about it does play around with your sympathies quite a lot, in that the Gavin character's dad, who's a bit kind of pathetic, he turns out to be, I'd say like the hero of the piece, in that he like was willing to at the end of the film, he's willing to sacrifice himself to save the kids when Morel's gone totally out of control and is threatening them all with a hammer. And you get the sense that Morel is going to kill the guy, but he's willing to sacrifice himself to save the children, which is quite a brave thing to do. And then Romeo's dad turns up to save the day. And he's also a character you don't really like up to that point, because he's kind of a distant father. You get the sense on some level he may have even been an abusive father, but he is the one who kind of saves the day at the end. So it is a kind of weird how the film plays around with your sympathies like that. Yeah,
I was surprised what a sort of everyone's okay, warm-hearted story it ends up being, to be honest, considering as you say, the fact that both the dads especially had some quite obvious character flaws, and Morel was obviously psychotic. I did kind of expect it to end in a slightly less everyone's together and happy way than that. The way it sort of slid towards a happy ending was surprising to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's quite a sort of slow, naturalistic style here, which did make me think about how different this is compared to a lot of the very stylised, often genre-y stuff I normally watch, which is usually more keen to wank me off or invite me to wank the author off with, aggressively sort of witty dialogue, imaginative concepts or clever plot twists. Very on the nose, look at what I'm doing, whereas this drifts along in a slightly less waving it in my face way.
Yeah, it's got a interesting approach. I think it's sort of like a social realist film. Social realism is a sort of predominantly British sort of cinema movement of kind of drama films that sort of set out to document kind of usually working class life. And this film is kind of very much made in that tradition. And yeah, there's a lot of actors acting for the first time, kind of actual kids who are from those backgrounds. It's quite naturalistic in that way. It owes a lot to the kind of Mike Leigh kitchen sink dramas. But what I think makes this film different is that this film has that kind of sort of tension running through it. Whereas a lot of those other films, they focus a lot on character drama, but there isn't a sense of a sort of a threatening presence usually there, even though there's conflict and emotional drama. But it doesn't usually get as tense as this film, which I think it's a kitchen sink drama, but with something added to it, which is why I think I find it more interesting than a lot of the work of Mike Leigh and stuff, who is a good filmmaker, but I don't know, I think this Shane Meadows has got he's got something a bit more to him than just trying to document working class life.
Well, yeah, I just said it's all very, very naturalistic. Morel is a bit more of a sort of big performance and a big sort of, air quotes, fun character. His sort of Partridge-esque rambling would be quite fun if it wasn't for the fact that as you watch the film, you increasingly get the sense that it's often leading up to him doing something slightly less pleasant. Yeah,
you're right that he's a very British sort of weirdo. He's it's somewhere between Alan Partridge and sort of also Michael from the Alan Partridge TV show. Is kind of that sort of mould of character of someone who seems kind of pleasantly dim on the surface, but it has this kind of darker side lurking underneath. Yeah, I think we've all kind of known or met people like this. I certainly have occasionally made the mistake of befriending people like Morel and discovering. And obviously, no one's ever threatened me with a hammer. I'd like to make that clear. But I don't know. In the past, I've befriended the very British weirdo. Yeah, it's a recognisable archetype.
Yeah, they occasionally sidle up to me in Wetherspoons, and it's very much something I back slowly away from normally.
Yeah.
It's interesting. As I say, I can see how this sort of led to both Shane Meadows and Paddy Considine having sort of wider careers. I think I liked Dead Man's Shoes a bit more than I liked this. Possibly because, as we discussed at the time, that had a certain sort of larger-than-life British Punisher vibe going on.
Yeah, and there's more of a twist in Dead Man's Shoes as well, and there's some quite sort of stylized bits, like the bit when they take acid and he puts on the mask is much more stylized. But yeah, I think Dead Man's Shoes is kind of I think that was the last film the three of them made together. They did Once Upon a Time in the Midlands afterwards, I think, but that doesn't have Paddy Considine in it. So yeah, I think this is the last of those three working together. And yeah, I guess Dead Man's Shoes is kind of the end of the kind of this process. And they've got more money and more confidence, and that's why it's probably a better film.
Well, yeah, this is obviously a sort of first film, which...
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it was actually Shane Meadows' first film.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
his first feature-length film, yeah.
It definitely feels like your first sort of early work in terms of the money available to them. But then again, the sort of straight on, fairly sort of plain, unstylized shots of the area where they live, when they're walking down to the chippy at the start, does set the scene pretty nicely.
Yeah, the whole thing was made clearly for about a $5.
Yeah.
And I think is really good considering that. They got a really good cast. All the kids were good, and casting unknown child actors and things can sometimes be a recipe for disaster. But I thought the two kids are really good, and you really buy into their friendship.
Yeah, especially the guy playing Romeo. Well, the kid, later guy playing Romeo was really good, I thought.
Yeah, he's still acting. I did look at, when I was researching this, just out of curiosity, went to his IMDb page, and he appeared in, I think, some kind of recent British drama that I didn't watch, but no good. He's still acting. So yeah, and he's definitely talented. Yeah, and obviously you can see the potential here for Shane Meadows, Paddy Considine, Paul Fraser. They've gone on to bigger things. Shane Meadows had a big hit with This Is England. The kid who plays Romeo is in This Is England as well, actually.
Yeah. So this was a big film for you as a teenager. How did it feel coming back to it? Did you have strong burning nostalgia? Did you like it more, like it less?
Yeah, it really did bring back the teenage memories as well. I guess partly because it's a film about childhood as well. I was older than the kids when I saw it. So it came out in 1999, and I quite like the fact that we're visiting it on its 20th anniversary. It's definitely something that, it kind of seems like an appropriate point to look at this film. I didn't see it initially when it came out. I saw it probably about 3 or so years later when I kind of started getting involved in filmmaking in the East Midlands and getting more interested in film, because I started getting into film like watching the Hollywood classics, big stuff like Taxi Driver and Godfather and things, and then discovered like American independent cinema, like Steven Soderbergh and things like that. And then after that, kind of British independent cinema, British films that aren't like Richard Curtis movies or whatever. And then it kind of really showed me what can be done, I guess, especially for little money and with some talented people, that there is like an audience for this stuff. It's sort of like a cult. There's like a cult sort of subculture of people really into British films, and it kind of really reminded me of that. Yeah, it was great to read again. I thought it really held up, especially as like when kind of the twists that are coming and the points when Morell's going to flip, but it still is quite very intense. So I thought it stood up, and it was good to revisit it because there's always something new I noticed about the film, just like little things. Like this time I realized that I've forgotten how good the soundtrack was. Because they didn't have much money, they seem to have somehow licensed some pretty good music for the soundtrack. Like it's got the specials that are opening at the beginning. There's a Ian Brown track that plays at one point. There's a Billy Bragg track that plays over the end credits. Yeah, so this time it was good to revisit because I was like, I forgot, man, there's like really good soundtrack. And Shane Meadows films do generally have really good music. Like This Is England especially has lots of great music in it. It's in the past, and music's a great way to evoke the past. But I forgot, even from his early films, he was choosing really good music to go in his films. So that was nice to discover.
Yeah, you're right. It probably did take a decent chunk out of his budget, but I guess that's one of the easiest ways to put on the sort of sense memory of the audience. Show a kid walking carefully down a high street to a classic song of the era, and you've basically evoked the past successfully. Well done. Feet up.
And also I forgot how Midlands it looks as well. I think it's shot in Nottingham, which is where I believe Shane Meadows is from. But he's a really great, I guess, portrayer of the Midlands, which is unusual and things like that. You get, because it's not a place that has a strong identity. Obviously, there's loads of British films made in London because it's kind of the cultural centre of the country. But then obviously you get lots of films of places that really express regional identity. You get films about Liverpool, 24-Hour Party People, which I mentioned earlier when discussing Greed. Obviously, is a film all about Manchester and the cultural significance of Manchester. And obviously, there's lots of films that express Scotland or things like that. But the Midlands, especially the East Midlands, where I grew up, not a rich mine of films to tap into there. But it really does look distinctively Midlands when you watch it, especially they say the opening shots of these kids walking through a small Midlands town. And I was basically that kind of summed up a lot of nostalgia for where I grew up and things like that. Ironically, I'm in the East Midlands currently when I record this, which is unusual.
Yeah, it's a big location for Alastair, if not for the podcast as a whole.
You don't see places like this on film very much. In Britain right now, there's almost like a kind of culture war emerging, basically the town versus city culture war. The idea of the liberal metropolitan cities and the...
You're saying Morell would definitely be pro-Brexit?
I think so, yeah. Oh, God, he's Brexit party all over, isn't he? At the point, he's also fallen into some dodgy... Because, in 1999, the internet not so widely available, so... But now he's fallen into some kind of dodgy alt-right online pit, I'm sure.
It's true. He's probably gone beyond pro-Brexit and into pro-King Arthur at this point, hasn't he?
Yeah. In this time when there's a lot of people, there's this kind of culture war, between town versus city, and the Midlands is considered a battleground in that because it's where there are a lot of poor small towns, kind of where this film is set. And obviously see about working class life. And there is a kind of, on one level, there is a point that you don't see small towns in the Midlands represented in our culture very much, which this film is unusual that it does do that. And usually if it is represented, it's represented in a sort of Mike Lee-esque kind of middle-class people very self-consciously making films about working class life, rather than, Shane Meadows of a working class background. And if you've seen This Is England, probably his most famous film, it's very much about his childhood.
Well, yeah, I mean, the upside of the lack of obvious try-hard writer stuff in this film is that it does come across as authentic. It does feel very plausible, which I think is one of its big strengths.
Yeah, and it's it's showing a side of Britain we don't normally see. There are lots of recognisable British archetypes in that. The man drinking alone in Wetherspoons by himself, wearing army gear.
Any number of Paddy Considine characters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But even though I'm not working class, you can tell from my ridiculous voice, but when I saw it as a teenager, it was great to see my life on screen. That's not what Richard Curtis does. That's not what Steven Soderbergh does, or this is the place around where I grew up and things like that. Yeah, again, you see it in This Is England, and you see it in A Room for Romeo Brass. That evoked some nice nostalgic feelings when I rewatched it.
Okay, I'm glad we haven't ruined your childhood for this podcast.
So yeah, do you feel illuminated by this deep cut of my soul?
I can see that it's a big influence on you, yeah. Having read some of your stuff and seen a lot of movies you've recommended, yes, I can see how you might have started you off on a journey. Even if I'm not sure it's the best thing I've seen in that area, in terms of raw reviewer bullshit.
Yeah, but yeah, it's seminal work for me.
And now into the weeds of my teenage years with Transmetropolitan, the dystopian sci-fi comic by Warren Ellis and Darick Robertson, published by DC back in the day, first by their short-lived Helix sci-fi imprint and then moving over to their general adult content imprint Vertigo. And this is, of course, the story of gonzo journalist Spider Jerusalem, who has retired from his career as a journalist in the hellish future dystopian city because he just can't stand it anymore, but unfortunately is pulled back after a few years living as a hermit in the mountains by, of course, an editor who has him on a contract to write books. And much as Spider hates the city, he also can't write when he's away from it, so he's forced to travel back into this advertising-ridden dystopian hellscape to get back into journalism. And yeah, this is a pretty seminal comic. I'm pretty sure there's a generation of people for whom this was their big gateway and from superhero stuff into more sort of air quotes adult work. And Jesus Christ, thank God I still like this. If anything, I'm actually surprised how well it still holds up. I'm interested what Alastair thinks as someone who's read a bit more hard sci-fi than me, but I really enjoy Ellis and Robertson's sort of crunchy, gooey future vision, and the voice of Spider Jerusalem is still very addictive and hard to turn away from. So yeah, Alastair, what did you think?
Well, reading this is definitely an experience. And
Good.
Yeah, it really is quite something. And it's an experience that I enjoyed a lot. Yeah, you can tell by the fact that I think we said I'd read an unspecified number of issues for this episode of the podcast and ended up reading 12 issues. I did enjoy it. I think what sold me on it is straight away I realised, which I didn't really know much about it before. I know that it's quite seminal work and that Nick really liked it, but didn't really know much. And it was sort of sci-fi, sort of slightly dystopian, maybe slightly cyberpunk, but I didn't know much about it. But as soon as I started reading it, I realised straight away this is heavily inspired by one of the works of my favourite writers, Hunter S. Thompson, and I'm totally on board for cyberpunk Hunter S. Thompson. That was quite excellent. I mean, what I liked most about Transmetropolitan is that through this, they've really captured the essence of Hunter Thompson's personality in the character of Spider Jerusalem. It's the way he looks, the boozing, the drugs, the guns, his manic behaviour, his sort of total recklessness. But they've got to something which is the kind of obvious take on Hunter Thompson, but they've got, I think, down to the deeper sense of who he was as a writer and as a person, which is this need to expose corruption, but not just corruption as in dodgy business practices, but I need to expose this kind of moral corruption, this kind of deep stain on the soul of society that he was kind of dejected by and really wanted to expose the kind of disgusting, corrupted nature of of human collective living is sort of that he wants to really bring out and expose to the light is kind of the essence, I think, of a lot of Hunter Thompson's writing, and that is kind of the deal with Spider Jerusalem, that he doesn't really seem to believe in anything in particular, but has this powerful need to kind of bear society's soul to itself, which is kind of the substance of the sort of story. Yeah, that was really cool.
I think, the sort of wistful sadness and the desire that the corruption in society should be exposed and people should be given a chance to be recognised as people. This sort of genuine sadness and righteous anger at the heart of Spider Jerusalem is one of the things that, I say this as someone who doesn't really have much, let's be honest, any familiarity with the work of Hunter Thompson, is what makes Transmetropolitan, really good and engaging rather than just Warren Ellis amusing himself. Because it could obviously just be straight up heartless satire. He could just use this future setting to absolutely rake modern society over the coals by influence. But Spider Jerusalem's genuine desire to try and improve things and make things better in his sort of, as you say, violent, irresponsible way is what makes it actually transcend, to bring in the word.
Yeah, definitely. There's like he's trying to make the world a better place, and it's not just like anarchic chaos. I won't spend the whole segment talking about Hunter Thompson, but like again, there's this sense of like you read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Yeah, it is like a book about people like just being like on drugs and like drunk and like just doing crazy things. But there's a real sense underneath that, which I think you usually get the second time you read the book, which is like there's a real sense underneath of like this real sense of sadness and loss of the kind of optimism of the 1960s. Like we had a chance to make society better and like we didn't, and now we live in this like horrible corrupt society. And you get that with like Spy Jerusalem, the sense of like he thinks like we can be better, and if we cared and things like that. I mean, that especially comes across I think in like the third issue, like which is there's a
the Riot one.
Yeah, there's a plot line involving humans who've kind of. There's some aliens in the background of this. It's kind of quite cyberpunky, which I kind of liked. It's like set in the future, science fiction, but like there's not really huge like amounts of technological change. There's bits and pieces, but there are aliens on the Earth, but they don't really appear very much. They seem to be isolated somewhere in Eastern Europe, I think, in a sort of slightly Stalker-esque kind of nod there or something like that. But there's these people who are kind of like half human, half alien hybrids who are kind of sort of social outcasts, and then the kind of corrupt powers that be decide just they want to get rid of them and kind of send the police in to stomp on them. And oops, I made that mistake. Spider Jerusalem is able to expose through his column to the kind of the wealthy people's society how they don't care and how they're heartless, and how like if society's for everyone, it's for it's for the people who don't fit in, and it's for the people that you look down on, but it should be for everyone, and like they don't deserve to have their teeth kicked in because they're different. And he's like a truth teller. He needs to expose this like moral stain on the soul of society. And it's a great piece of writing, and like it's really quite tense. If we think like a thing about a man writing a column in a riot, they find a real like tension and like sense of like lives are at stake for that.
Well, yeah, it's a very nice bit of comics. The sort of play of Spider Jerusalem's column / novation / column over the top of the images of the riot is what plays that image out and makes it all the more sad. I mean, you can imagine, they're probably never going to successfully adapt Transmetropolitan, because I'm honestly not sure it's adaptable. But you could imagine the voiceover type shit they do in the TV version that they'll never make.
Yeah, that would probably, it just wouldn't work as well. Just have like excessive quantities of heavy voiceover. It doesn't work as well. One thing that I think why it wouldn't really work as a TV show is one of the things like I really liked about it is like the art is like amazing. Like the whole way they brought the world to life. I don't see how you could translate that visually. Maybe someone like Sam Levinson.
Honestly, the constant sort of Technicolor bullshit of it would just be impossible to sustain, wouldn't it? You just run out of money.
You wouldn't be able to do it properly. But what I like with this, it's like it's weirdly like I've been trying to put my finger on like God, the art is so beautiful and it's so interesting. But it's like it really reminds me of something. And I was afraid I can't put my finger on it. And I've finally put my finger on it. And let's see if you agree with this or not. The way I describe the art is it's kind of grotesque. Where's Wally? Right.
Well, you mean all the details in the background and stuff.
Yeah. So bear me with this, right? So if anyone's ever read Where's Wally, or Where's Waldo, as he's called in America for some reason.
100 episodes in, we finally hit. If anyone's read Where's Wally?
It's a seminal comic, but you know how like there's like each picture is like got like loads and loads. There's like huge amounts going on in like every picture, and the idea is obviously to distract you from finding Wally. But anyway, like there's like hundreds of little like skits and bits and things going on, and it's all so busy and it's all in your face. It makes it really hard to look at. There's like Transmet. It's kind of like that in that. In the big, especially like the big crowd scenes, if you look, there's always like stuff in the background, like little things like going on here. There's so much detail and like the whole, but it's all kind of like grotesque. It's all like people like puking and fucking and like doing drugs and things like that in this kind of like decaying hellscape of a city. Yeah, it's like there's a real richness of kind of life. I think it's kind of like how like they describe Terry Pratchett describes Ankh-Morpork. I think so. It's full of life as a dead dog on top of a termite mound. That's roughly what Pratchett said, and that's kind of what you get from this, like this kind of teeming mass of kind of grotesque, filthy urban living.
Yeah, it's always been a big part of what's always been most sort of vibrant and in your face about Transmet, the sort of constant mass of grim future detail, all the horrible brand names that just scroll past on every screen, and all the mank and drug paraphernalia that you can just see abandoned on every random sidewalk. It's
Yeah.
It's an interesting sort of combination because Robert Ellis is a writer from Southend and Darick Robertson is a sort of relatively veteran American superhero artist, and they seem to have combined to produce this sort of transatlantic vision of this sort of horrible American city.
Yeah, and it's really beautiful and sort of grotesque at the same time. Like, it's an amazing art, and like it really kind of brings the whole place to life. And you kind of like, I think you're sort of like through the art, you're kind of seeing the city through how Spider Jerusalem sees it, just like constant, never-ending kind of disgustingness, which is why he absolutely can't stand it.
Yeah, I must admit, going back and reading Spider as an adult is weird. I'm pretty sure I probably hero worshipped him somewhat uncritically as a teenager and viewed all the people saying, but Spider, you're a fuck up, as basically boring party poopers. But reading it aged 35, it is possible Spider might be a bit of a fuck up.
Yeah, but I think that's how the character's written. It's what's intended.
Yes, I was quite stupid as a teenager. Thank you for pointing it out.
Sorry.
I don't think I'm not defending my teenage self. He probably needs a kicking.
Yeah, but it's one of those things. Yeah, it's like I don't know. I was just saying about the Joker last time that like you're not supposed to basically completely wholeheartedly identify with Spider Jerusalem, or you're supposed to like see that like he's a nightmare, and like on the end because there's like what I read is like 12 issues in the volume I've got, and there's like a little short story in the end of like Spider Jerusalem at Christmas, and he's basically just wandering around going, "I've got no friends and no one likes me." It's like maybe it's because of your personality. I don't know.
Yeah, I've got no friends, no one likes me. I spend Christmas rearranging snowmen into the most upsetting shapes possible. Strangely, I am unpopular.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And it's like screaming about how we killed Santa and like to a TV news thing. Yeah, just put children in the hospital, apparently.
But again, I mean, we just finished talking about, the romantic ethics of Spider Jerusalem. You're clearly meant to identify with his view of the world, at least as, he cares about people.
Yeah.
Even though he is also a massive anti-hero fuck-up.
Yeah, that's what I say. I think anti-hero is the best. Yeah, obviously you're on his side. There's like a 3-part. The last 3 form like one story, and like when people are coming to kill him, basically. And obviously, yeah, you're very much like you want him to live, and you want him to keep going and keep telling his truth about society. And he saves the human alien hybrids in the riot. And he saves lives, and he's trying to make society a better place. He's coming from a good place, but also there's like his manic behavior, his drug use, his things like that, his general kind of no bullshit attitude makes him on some level dislikable, but also on some level he is kind of a cool anarchist. It's good to relate to the idea of a truth teller, someone who like tells people what they need to hear, especially when he's telling like powerful people what they need to hear about how corrupt they are. So there is something very admirable and likable about him. There's also I think the character is quite interestingly complex in that he's also got like lots of like dislikable sides, like he's clearly just like a nightmare to work for or with.
So I didn't notice this when I read it as a teenager, but now, possibly because I've been getting a bit more into, writing and comics craft myself, I noticed that there's like first-person narration from Spider Jerusalem in like the first 3-issue storyline, which then vanishes in issue like 4, because I think they give him an assistant to yell at, and that sort of takes the place of the first-person narration.
Yeah, which makes sense. The assistant's an interesting character. Yeah, I kind of felt that, like, my only criticism of it, I think, is that I kind of wanted more from her. She sort of disappears later on, and, like, the episode about her boyfriend being turned into a cloud of foglets I thought was quite good and was quite interesting. But then her character sort of disappears a bit.
Minor spoiler, but she will be back to play a moderately substantial role in the not-too-distant future in the series. She is not gone for good. She's just gone from that last 3-parter.
Yeah, I assume she's back at some point because she's like been a main character. But yeah, I kind of wanted to dig into a bit more about who she was and things like that. But yeah, like the episode about her relationship with her boyfriend is like, I did like that issue because, yeah, it kind of built up her character more. Yeah,
this first 12 issues we read, I mean, Transmetropolitan was basically 5 years, like 5 12-issue runs, which broadly are kind of TV seasony. Like when each year started, they put year 2 and year 3 in huge letters on the cover.
Yeah.
To make it clear that this was the start of a new section. So yeah, this is a sort of a 12-issue run, and there's sort of a 3-parter at the beginning, a 3-parter at the end, and 6 sort of standalones in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of those standalones. There's some great sci-fi in those standalones.
Yeah, there's some really good ones. Like, I think it was issue 8 you said you really liked about the woman who's cryogenically frozen and wakes up in the future.
Yes, that was really good, although, to be honest, it didn't stand out clear and above the rest quite as much as I remembered it reading them back. I think they're all really good and interesting. But if you want a really big, sort of sad moments, then the cryogenically frozen woman is probably the big one in this one, the sort of the semi-tearjerker. A
story that, Spider Jerusalem's very much in the background. I guess the whole thing is told through the sort of voiceover for that that issue is like his column, I suppose. So that's how he's present in the story. But yeah, it mainly focuses on someone else.
Did you have a favourite issue?
I quite like the reservation one. The one when he goes to this bit where you can sort of live in this kind of pre-technological existence. There's something quite clever in that. Like, it begins by saying that like they allow kind of what they consider to be like barbarically backwards cultural practice in these areas because they want to preserve the culture, and there's some debate there about relativism and universalism, which I thought was quite well handled. But also it's got quite the whole sort of running bit about in that issue when Spider Jerusalem just keeps asking women out, and the rejections get like more and more like ridiculous as he goes on. Yeah, that was quite funny. Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah, the cryogenically frozen one is good. If I had to choose a favorite, actually, it's not a standalone issue, but probably it would be issue 3. We really kind of brings all the moving parts together. How you can see how he writes a column that saves lives, and you kind of see why he's a big deal.
And this is a work from the very late 90s, and I think most of it ended up coming out in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Do you think it comes across as aged sci-fi? Do you think it is tangibly nearly 20 years old?
I think, yeah, well, what's interesting about it is they seem to have avoided too many like kind of obvious hallmarks, like anything that's like kind of would like date really badly in terms of like technological predictions or something like that. And like, because even though it's sci-fi, what I kind of like about it is that like it's like, I don't know, social sci-fi. It's more about how we live in the future, not about what cool new gadgets we have and things like that. And there's some quite prescient things, like the fact that like all the information comes through like feeds that you can subscribe to and things like that.
Warren Ellis is very on the internet technology. Like, Warren Ellis was using Twitter and RSS feeds long before I'd heard of them.
Yeah.
Not that I'm Captain fucking Technophile, but yeah, Warren Ellis was very much on all this stuff. So I think he was well placed to at least take a reasonable guess at where we might conceivably go, or at least generalise it enough that he would be able to guess some vague trends. There's a lot of people still using like handheld hardware phones to an extent that I thought, are we still going to be doing that in this future? But to be honest, that was one of the only bits that really jarred at me.
Yeah, I think it doesn't seem to have aged poorly at all and things like that. Again, like it's not about the technology, it's more about how we live in the future, and that view doesn't really go out of date. Yeah, I thought, it's held up remarkably well.
Do you think Spider's worship of the truth has aged a bit weirdly in our post-truth, fake news, blah blah region?
Well, this is the thing, is like, I was reading a book by David Runciman, who's a sort of politics professor, and writes a lot about things like truth. And what he kind of gets at is that even though we live in the post-truth age, we kind of clamour for truth more than we ever did, but what we want is like our truth, like a truth that speaks to us, which is what creates problems of like fake news, in that you'll believe your truth over objective truth. Leaving the philosophical aside, so like, but he talks about there's a big hunger for like truth tellers, and like every like culture, like and political group has like their truth tellers. Like, for some people it's like, well, for some fuckheads it's like Tommy Robinson, but like, and for other people it's like it's Gina Miller, or it's Laurie Penny, or it's Aaron Bassani, or like, every subculture's got like their truth teller, and you can kind of see that. Yeah, Spider Jerusalem is like he's the truth teller now. I mean, he'd be perfect in this age. Like he tells truth, but like it's like a truth. I mean, and obviously he's writing, because it's in that Gonzo style. It's very subjective. So yeah, I think he'd be great in our day and age, because it'd be interesting in Metropolitan, because like somewhere out there in the city there's someone who thinks that Spider Jerusalem's full of bullshit, and he just lies, and or he just distorts the truth to fit what he thinks. So I don't know if they get into that later ones, like who are the people who disagree with Spider Jerusalem?
Suffice to say that, over the course of 60 issues, he is not universally beloved.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, like, again, like, especially, like, journalists of today, some of them are someone's held up as a truth teller by one group or subculture, political faction, and derided as a spinner of misinformation and bullshit by another faction. And I could see perfectly how Spider Jerusalem would fit into that. Again, I'm sure there's people who read Hunter Thompson's work and are at the time where basically, like, his portrait of America is not, they think is like inaccurate. He's not exposing the truth of America. He's just kind of a cynic saying everything's crap. Even in the age of post-truth, we kind of have a greater desire forever for truth tellers, especially our truth tellers. And Spider Jerusalem, is definitely someone's truth teller.
Wow, so what you're saying is that rather than being out of date, Transmet is actually more relevant than ever.
I would go as far as to say that, yeah, definitely. And because like so much journalism is like, with the internet and the blurring the line between opinion and news reporting, that like this kind of journalism is very much sought after today and things like that. And like the Gonzo style is more relevant now than ever. I mean, like I say, it didn't die with Hunter Thompson. Like, Laurie Penny, I think, is a great example of like a modern Gonzo journalist. I think earlier this year I read her like long read about a Bitcoin cruise or a cryptocurrency cruise. And it's pure Gonzo, throw yourself in, become the story.
I'm pretty sure Laurie Penny was influenced by Transmetropolitan. I think she's quite matey with Roman Ellis. So yeah, there's probably some cultural crossover there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen from her Twitter that she is, yeah. And I know she's like a big comics reader and a big nerd and fans of all this and this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's all part and parcel. But yeah, Gonzo journalism like continues to this day. So yeah,
I think I was reading it and thinking, yeah, I used to read Transmetropolitan and have these vague conversations about journalism and truth and media and ethics to myself in my head and think, wow, no one is talking about this and it's so clever. And now I read it and think, wow, these are the conversations that I think I might be having every minute I'm alive.
Yeah,
I don't know what that means. Maybe that does mean it's more relevant than ever.
Yeah, I think so. There's something about truth. Who is the truth teller? Whose opinion is the truth? And things like that. And like this kind of subjective approach to journalism and things like that that Gonzo does, and that obviously Spider Jerusalem is very much like a part of that. I think Hunter Thompson describes it as turning yourself into a human torpedo and firing yourself at the story, or something along that lines. And obviously that is what Spider Jerusalem does.
In fact, he says something somewhat paraphrased of that in issue 3, doesn't he? Journalism is a gun, it's got one bullet and it can blow a kneecap off the world, or something like that.
Yeah, it's the same thing, yeah. But the implication be like he is both the gun and the bullet as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird, like, yeah, it's... When I first read it, so it's a hard concept to get your head around, but this really does show how it works. Yeah, throw yourself in, become the story, but also tell the story. You kind of need that kind of manic agent of chaos attitude, I think, to do that.
Yeah, I really enjoy going back to this. If anything, it makes me want to go back and read the rest of it. I vaguely remember that it gets a bit less good when it gets into the latter years and arc plot inevitably happens. But there's a good 2.5, 3 years of it, but are really, really great.
So did this make you feel nostalgic for your childhoods, or bring back good memories?
Yeah, it really did. As I say, but a lot of it was slightly cringy memories of how much I used to really love and quote Spider Jerusalem in a slightly unironic way. But unironic, is that the wrong word? Sincere, unaware way. But yeah, it did make me feel very nostalgic for comics which throw me into this world and give me this one massive iconic yelling character, which I think a lot of it is just my love of the material. But I was happy to see it's actually good, and I hadn't just, fallen in love with something that was actually bad.
Yeah, it's like, sometimes like when you go back to like teenage things in media, you can see like, I can see how this opened my mind to like more stuff, but then that led to the good stuff was like found later on, like, you kind of like, I don't know, like Blink-182 for a great example was like, the first time I started listening to like music where people played guitars fast, but obviously there was much better stuff to discover later. You often find that a lot when you go back to like your seminal teenage things you got into. But I think Transmet is one of those ones that it stands up to a modern thing. It's definitely not a kind of, I can see how this would open your mind to bigger things. Like this is a big, substantial, solid thing in itself. I don't know. Yeah, my words are kind of getting away from you there, but it's good. It's very good.
It certainly makes me want to go back and read the other 4 years of it, which annoyingly are at my mum's house somewhere away, but that's my problem rather than the listeners. I'll work it out.
Yeah, I definitely want to read the rest of it at some point.
I'll either end up buying it in a Comixology sale out of weakness, or I'll find a way to get the books from my mum's house. One or the other.
And the bit at the end about drink your own piss day is just hilarious. It's a good note to end on. That brings us to the end of this special 100th episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you have enjoyed this podcast, then you can help us celebrate reaching 100 episodes by leaving us a review in iTunes or your podcatcher of choice. Or you can visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself. If you go there now, you'll see an article I have written about the use of tropes in stories.
And, of course, you can also follow us on social media, where, since it's our 100th episode, you'll hope we'll remember to at least post a couple of times, at MFV Podcast on Twitter, or by searching out Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook. And if you want to follow me specifically, you can go to nickbryan.com to find out about my comics writing and such, or you can follow me on Twitter at NickMB, or go to Facebook, where my page is Nick Bryan Writes.
And if you want to follow me, you can go to Twitter and follow me on @AlastairJRBall. You can also find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Ironically, I think I update my website more than my Twitter, but I will at some point post something on Twitter. But if you want more of my hot takes, go to redtrainblog.com. And that's it. The 100th episode is now over. That's 100 episodes of the podcast done. Thanks for being with us on this journey. It's been great. I've certainly enjoyed doing it. And yeah, we really appreciate the downloads and the people who do occasionally get in touch on social media. Yeah, thanks for being with us, guys. Yeah, it's been good.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, in 2 weeks' time, the story will continue with episode 101, where we will be reviewing Terminator Dark Fate. Join us then. Goodbye.
Bye. Raise a toast to the 100th episode of the podcast.
Add in the chink sound there.
Oh, God, yeah, hang on.